Hi, my name's Kris. Welcome to my studio. In this video, I'm going to show you how I painted this still life of a mango. And I'm particularly going to focus on how you create hard and soft edges and the contrast between them and how important that is in watercolor. Let's get started. Here is the finished painting. It is a ripe mango that looks super delicious, and I'm tempted to eat it. I set up a simple still life arrangement in my studio with a light box and single light source to create strong shadows and a bright highlight. I have another video on my channel that shows you how to set up a still life and the benefits of painting from direct observation. Check that video out if you're interested. I'll link it in the description below. I love mangoes. Oops, I ate the still life. So I've completed my study of the mango still life, and this again is on non-cotton paper, just a quick study that I did just to figure out what colors I wanted to use. I ended up with these 6 colors: Azo yellow, which is a cool yellow, a new Gambosia warm yellow, I have permanent alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and green gold. And that's a lot of colors really for this, but I kind of like the way they all came together and like the way this turned out. So now I'm going to get started on the real painting. Okay, I'm starting out with a pencil sketch of my still life, my mango. As you saw earlier, I did a little study of this exact same topic, the same subject, just to get a sense of the colors I wanted to use and practice a little bit. And so now I'm back to the drawing stage and trying to do a little bit better job this time rendering more accurately my shape. And the first one was just a little bit of a study. So you know, I'm going to have a shadow out in here as well. I don't need to define that super well because that will be maybe just where it comes off. That's the darkest part of the shadow, is where it actually butts up against the subject that's casting the shadow. And so you definitely want to define that well, but the rest of the shadow is going to be very, very light. There you go. Let's get started with the painting. Okay, as usual with watercolor, I'm going to start with my lightest colors. In this case, my Azo yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and paint wet on dry here. So this is going to give me hard edges all along this side. The outer edge of the mango I want to keep hard. I'm also aware that in this area here there is white highlight from my highlight from the lamp that I set up for lighting this still life. It's creating a nice bright white spot there, which I of course want to maintain. And I didn't draw it in, I'm just eyeballing it, kind of where that needs to be, right about up to there, and then down around the other side of that down here. That'll do. And yellow coming in here. And now I'm painting on a fairly small format, 9x6 about. So the largest brush I'm going to use here pretty much is this number 14 round. I always want to use the largest brush I can get away with. My style, if you don't already know and you're just coming to my channel, is a loose impressionistic style is what I'm aiming for. And so part of the process in doing that is to not get the tiny little brush painting the fine little details and that kind of thing. I try to stay away from that. I'm softening some of these edges now. Again, this tutorial is going to be much about the contrast between soft and hard edges and the need for that. I'm going to move over to my next yellow, my little bit more warmer yellow now. While this is still wet, I'm going to start to drop that in. And that's nice. Kind of just looking back and forth to my live setup of my mango. Still life there that I have set up in my studio. Okay. Again, still using this number 14 around. Again, I've got some hard edges in here that I want to keep. Again, looking at my reference, I see there's some real hard edges, but I also want to soften some of those. So now I'm going to start to mix in a little of my alizarin crimson. You can't see my palette, it is off stage or off camera, sorry, but I'll just kind of talk you through it. Again, using the 6 colors I mentioned already previously, and alizarin crimson here mixed into my new gamboge. Picking up a little of that water there. All right, I'm just going to keep going, kind of working all at once with this initial wash. This is going to get much darker as I come around to this side where I'm going to transition into my permanent alizarin crimson, red. Be careful there because it's wet and I had quite a bit of water on the brush at that point. And now I've got, still wet on wet, but I've got a much drier brush. The brush has a lot of pigment on it, but it doesn't have a lot of water in it. There is like a science to this in the sense that you're almost always need to be very aware. And this is where I think beginners struggle. They don't realize what's going on in the head of the artist. There is also always an awareness of how much water and how much pigment is on your brush at any time. And there needs to be an awareness of that because the water and the pigments and the paper, those three mediums are working constantly, kind of working together or against each other, really. And you need to be aware. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. I'm taking new gamboge and kind of charging that right into the red that I just put down. And I'm going to come right up to this stem area. There's a bit of a dark that comes up into here. Now, this is just, again, my initial wash. Picking up some of my green gold, which is my only green. I could have mixed a green with my yellow and blue, but I really love this green, and so I like to use it. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and put that right in here. I like that. I like the way this green charged into the yellow and the oranges that were already there. Again, soft edges, soft edges. I moved down to a number 12 round here, just for a little bit, just a little bit smaller. well, it really dropped. A little bit of a mistake there. Felt like a little bit too much of that red, so I just dry my brush out and just come back and pick it up. All is not lost when things like that happen. Okay, I'm liking that. I'm gonna feel like maybe I'm gonna take some of my New Gamboa mixture with my red a little bit and come up in here, and I feel like there's too much of a hard edge here with this white. There's really not any glint up there, so I'm gonna bring that in here. Okay. It's just a beautiful, if you look at the texture of this mango, there's just a lot of beautiful mixing together, going back, kind of back and forth between yellow, green, orange, and red. And they all kind of mix together. There's kind of a dappled edge to, or texture too. You can see here I'm charging in with other colors to create some of that dappled look. I think I want to leave that for my first wash and not go any further. I'm going to let this dry at this point. The only thing I think I want to do, I love to create, one thing I like to do after I get this initial wash down and some of these edges is to come back and in a few areas with a wet brush, completely clean of pigment, I'll just kind of come in and just kind of come in close to some of these edges and just let them run into, see what I'm doing here? Because there is, in light, in the way the light moves across the surfaces, there often is a blur against edges. And I don't want to completely blur it, so I was careful to keep most of that edge pretty of a hard edge, but I like to come back sometime and just kind of play around with it and create a little charge in with water into some of those areas. Just create an interesting, because that's really what the look of watercolor, in my opinion, is where you see some of those blurry edges. All right, I'm gonna let this dry now. All right, I'm gonna start to work a little bit on my shadow here. This is the tabletop. I'm going fairly light. It's gonna be much darker ultimately, but I'm just wanting to put down an initial wash of a reddish tone, because this table kind of has that real reddish tone to it, which is also reflecting off. Okay, so I've got some, just wet my brush and no pigment in there. I just want to pull this out. Now again, that's going to go quite a bit darker. I've got a little bit of water blooms in there just because I put down a lot of water on that, but that's, I'm going to cover over that later, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. All right, I'm looking, I want to talk a little bit about contrast. All good paintings have a high degree of contrast and multiple different types of contrast. When most people hear contrast, they tend to think contrast between values, between light values and darker values. But there's more than that, more types of contrast than just value contrast, lightness and darkness. There are contrasts as well in color between cool colors and warm colors. And your painting should have all of these contrasts in them, quite typically. At least that's what I like. I'm indebted to Thomas Schaller for teaching me about this and some of his tutorials, so you can look him up. But the contrasts are so important in the painting, and I try to achieve them. So contrast and value, which I haven't achieved that yet. There's still not real super dark values in here yet anywhere, and I'm going to try to add those next. Also, value of color, I've got that going on with cools and warms. But then I need to add more cools. I need to add some blues to deepen that side of the spectrum. But also then contrast between soft and hard edges. And again, that's what I've been trying to emphasize here. So, and so in all your paintings, it's good to think about all those things at once. Granted, that's difficult to do, but it helps to be aware that all these different things are going on in your painting at the same time. So I'm going to work on the shadow side of my mango now, coming in with some pure alizarin crimson. This is wet on dry because I allowed this to dry. And just really looking for what's called the core shadow, which really runs from up here, really across this way, up a bit this way, towards the stem area and back down into here, and underneath the stem area down into here. Now, it doesn't stay that red the whole time, but that is, and I want to soften that core shadow because it's not going to be that hard. I'm going to go to a little bit smaller brush, enabling me to get in there to some of this detail. All right, there's a bit. I want to leave some of that orange in that area. Okay, again, I have some hard edges, but I'm also really trying to soften some of these edges out. Okay. Like that. I like the soft right in here, up against some of the hard edges. And you don't have to have uniformity. You can have your edges kind of start hard edges and then transition to a soft edge and then back again. And that's actually a really beautiful technique, lost and found edges, they call it. You kind of start with a line and then let that line break. You kind of lose the edge, lost and found, and then comes back and comes back again. Okay, I like that. Really darkened the values there. And I'm going to pick up a little bit, not much, but a little bit of my ultramarine blue now. And I might soften that up or a little bit with this red. There's some real darkness, almost a purpley color over in here. And I'm going to kind of emphasize that a bit. And because that's wet on wet now, it's going to nicely kind of blend out. But I feel like that needs a little help in doing that. All right, I'm going to let that be for a bit. Sometimes you just need to work on an area and then leave it for a while because you're not going to get the full sense of what that area is going to do until it dries. And so to work it too much during this stage when it's still quite wet is probably going to overwork it. So I'm going to leave it and come back later. I like to work in stages, letting things dry in between. I want to get a bit of my alizarin crimson with my new gamboge to make more of an orange, the darker orange than I used before, and Sometimes I like to use the edge of my brush. It helps. There's more paint out at the end of the bristles and less and more water at the near the ferrule, and so you can lay down a nice gradiated effect from just by using the brush on its side. Great technique. I just like the look of the effect when I do that as well. Now the areas I'm working on now are still dry. I had let them dry earlier, so stippling in here is particularly strong in this area here when I get near that light glint, and so I'm just going to kind of drop some color in there. I accidentally dropped kind of a big piece there. I'm going to come back and soften it. I'm going to mix up a little bit of my burnt umber with my ultramarine blue, which is going to make almost a black. And while this is still wet right in here, I'm going to drop some in there because I want that to charge up into that orange area that I just painted. On the left side, however, it's dry, so it's going to make more of a hard edge, like that. I think I might even grab just a little blue and drop that in and soften it so that I can see some of the blue a little bit more, because it's beautiful up against the orange. The blue is a contrast. There we go. And it kind of pull out some of this color, the blue that I just put down, kind of away from this stem area. I think that'll look nice. There we go. All right, again, leaving that. I think that's good enough. Don't want to work it too much. Back to this orange and coming down over here where I kind of left this area a little too white in here. The glint is not in that area, so now I'm going to come back, which, you know, it's okay if you did that something not quite right the first pass, because you're going to have another opportunity. And so I'm going to come in here and I put down some. I'm going to leave some of those hard edges, but I'm also going to soften some of them up. How do I do that once I put down the paint, wet on dry? Well, I just come back with my brush clear of just water, no paint, no pigment, and just come along the edge of the area I just put down and let it blend out into the wet, adding a little water. And when I drop it in where it's already wet, it just beautifully charges out. All right, I've just mixed up a little New Gamboge with my burnt umber. And I just want to kind of change the tone of this area in here, which is essentially my tabletop. Your paintings, your subjects do need to have a place in space to live in. In other words, they need to be rooted to their surroundings. And so you should always, in this case, it's a tabletop. Otherwise, they just look like they're floating in outer space, which I don't really like, and I mean, obviously it looks weird. So, trying to, give a sense for that here. but at the same time continuing to work with the shadow. I already said it earlier, your shadows are going to be darkest in that spot where they come up right against the edge of your subject matter, and then they get lighter as you move away. Nice dark, very dark shadow area, which I like. I like to have strong contrast. Remember we talked about contrast. Now I've got super dark contrast here, or just a really dark value in that shadow. Yeah, I like it. Hopefully you can like your own work, right? You know, I like to be kind to myself, and even if I don't particularly like a painting or something, some part of the painting didn't quite turn out the way I wanted, I try to always find something that I like about it, and even speak it out loud. You know, say, I like that. You know, I like that. and then try to almost force yourself to focus away from maybe the part you don't like, because there's always in any painting something you don't like, probably. So on that glint, you know, on this right side, I try to soften. On the other side, I have a hard edge. So again, contrasting the hard and the soft. The darkest part of the green on this mango is over here on the far right. And it kind of comes around and then comes around the edge of that there. So I'm laying down pretty much dry there, so it's wet on dry, pretty heavy pigment. And now time to come back in and, where necessary, soften the edge, dragging some of that color down into other parts of the painting down here. You can soften like this with water on brush with no pigment, or you can come back in with another color that you see there and soften with that as well, and dropping that in. And that's another way of doing it. So I'm doing that with the yellow and even some of this orange. Sometimes you just do something accidentally and it just pops and you go, oh yeah, that's right. That was good right there. Now I know the shadow here is going to have some reflection of the subject there, the object, the mango, and its red side is close to this side of the shadow. So I've decided to add some of this alizarin crimson right into the shadow that I did earlier. I'm going to take a step back from this and let it dry a bit. Decided I needed a ground line, horizon line there, just to be the edge of the table, something like that. And I want kind of a change of color, very light. I'm actually gonna paint. This is wet on dry now. This is completely dry. This is a mix of my ultramarine blue, a little bit of the alizarin crimson in there, kind of mixed in. And actually, some of that burnt umber is actually in there as well. I think I might turn this over and set this up at a little bit of an angle. Trying to get all my pigment out of my brush there. I don't know, I just wanted something more there. And Again, that's something you can do as well, is pick up your board with your paper on it and give it a deeper angle, allowing colors to run. It is called watercolor for a reason. The water is such an important part of that, and you can do a lot with letting it, using gravity as well. Okay, I like that. I don't know, I just felt like I needed something else going on here. Kind of foreground, midground, I don't know. So just really quick, I'm seeing being very messy there. And it's going to be definitely darker on this. On the left side, just because of the shadow. There we go. I like that better. Just like the intensity of that as well. I like intense and strong contrasts. So got that going on there a bit more. Okay, I think I'm gonna let that be. And you see, I don't always paint areas completely. I kind of leave kind of like, I don't know, a little bit of dry brush where I just kind of drag the brush across at least just dappling edges of the rough paper coming through in places where I don't put any pigment. And I think it just adds interest as opposed to something being a solid color, which just doesn't look very realistic. Okay. Now, one thing I noticed as I was waiting and letting this dry is that in every, white is usually not completely white, right? It's got a bunch of usually blue and sometimes pink in it. And so I noticed that where my glint is, the white highlight shining, the light shining off of it, there's, especially on this left side of it, there's quite a bit of blue. Now I don't want to go too dark here, but I want to emphasize some of that. And again, soften parts of it. I think that's going to help make it look a little bit more realistic. Also, just over on the left-hand side now, I did put some ultramarine blue in the shadow before, the shadow of the mango on this side, but I want to do it again. Again, this is dry now. And so I often like to do it in pretty broad brush strokes. To get a strength of that. Now I'm thinking it's too much there on the top, so it's back with some water. And picking up, literally lifting some of the pigment I just put down because I just didn't like how strong that went on. Especially near the top, that color that shadow is not as strong at the top as it is on the left towards the table a bit more in here. Another thing I noticed is I might want to try, I'm going to try and lift a little of the paint just around the edge of this stem area, because there is a little bit of light around the stem. And then coming right up to the stem, it's dark and there's kind of a hard edge there. Noticing there's a little bit of a reflection of blue down at the bottom, kind of the shadow bouncing back up towards the, put that in down at the bottom. Here, softening some of that line in places. Using ultramarine blue now to really define the deepest part of the shadow, cast shadow. Painting it, glazing it now wet over what's now dry in this area. Some of the colors that I put down previously, though, are still going to shine through, creating a really beautiful painterly effect. The beautiful part about watercolor is its transparency, and so allowing colors to come through when you glaze one transparent color over the next, letting them dry in between, you get just gorgeous layering of colors, translucent colors that are shining through one color shining through the next. It's just gorgeous. It is what watercolor is best for, best used for, or it's one of its great strengths, is that you can do that. Well, you can't do that with other mediums. So we got to learn to take advantage of that when we use watercolor. I feel like I need some more defining around this stem. It's just a little too, I don't know, non-distinct, and it's an important part here. Okay, I think I'm getting ready to the point where I can sign this and be done with it. Hope you've enjoyed this. If this has been helpful to you to learn about still lifes, and particularly about the contrast between soft and hard edges and how you can achieve that in a still life, then yeah, thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful. If you enjoyed it, I would ask that you would subscribe to my channel. I put out videos like this about once a week, and my goal is really to help the beginner in watercolor to overcome some of the many obstacles and challenges of watercolor as a medium. And I'm a learner, and I've been doing this now for about 2 years, and so I'm learning as I go, and I'm just wanting to share those lessons with others. So join me on the journey. Thanks. Have a great day.